So, hello and welcome back. We are back yet again with Mr. Charles Dickens and his novel A Tale of Two Cities. And it's kind of funny. I was watching a YouTube video this morning and it just randomly the person I was watching mentioned Charles Dickens and how they didn't really care for Charles Dickens because they found him too wordy, and I was like, oh, I feel validated a little bit. Not that I don't like this. It's a good story, but yeah, he is definitely wordy. But I feel like the last few chapters have been at least a little more story, even if they are still kind of wordy. I feel like they've been a little bit more story driven, which is nice. I like atmosphere, but I like my atmosphere with a side of story. Speaking of atmosphere, our weather. I know I know that anyone who is watching or listening from the southern United States definitely has more to complain about. It looks like you guys got slammed again, which is not cool. But our weather is just so March is such a trippy month. We were yesterday, I think it was 53 or 54 degrees. Today it's in the low 50s again. Tomorrow it's supposed to be 30 and snowing. March is weird. We did have all of the spring birds are starting to filter back in. And so I went out this morning to put out feed, and I realized that my springtime cacophony is starting up again. Definitely going to have to do another bird feeder video because the red-winged blackbirds and the grackles have arrived, and I love listening to them in the morning. Not that I'm complaining about the blue jays. The blue jays are lovely, but the red-winged blackbirds and the grackles are very melodic, and it's just so nice to sit out there and just listen to all of that, which I'm looking forward to being able to do as long as it's not snowing. Snow beats a tornado, though, I guess. Anyway, we spent the last chapter hanging out with Jerry and young Jerry and finding out that old Jerry is a resurrection man. He goes fishing quite often, and when he is fishing for corpses, which is a little bit on the icky side. I have no idea what we're going to be doing in this next chapter, so let's jump in and find out as we continue with Charles Dickens' novel A Tale of Two Cities in Book 2, The Golden Thread, with Chapter 15 titled Knitting. There had been earlier drinking than usual in the wine shop of Monsieur Defarge. As early as 6 o'clock in the morning, sallow faces peeping through its barred windows had descried other faces within, bending over measures of wine. Monsieur Defarge sold a very thin wine at the best of times, but it would seem to have been an unusually thin wine that he sold at this time. A sour wine, moreover, or souring, for its influence on the mood of those who drank it was to make them more gloomy. No vivacious bacchanalian flame leaped out of the pressed grape of Monsieur Defarge, but a smouldering fire that burned in the dark lay hidden in the dregs of it. This had been the third morning in succession on which there had been early drinking at the wine shop of Monsieur Defarge. It had begun on Monday, and here was Wednesday come. There had been more of early brooding than drinking, for many men had listened and whispered and slunk about there from time of the opening of the door, who did not have a piece of money on the counter to save their souls. These were to the full as interested in the place, however, as if they could have commanded whole barrels of wine. They glided from seat to seat and from corner to corner, swallowing talk instead of drink with greedy looks. Notwithstanding an unusual flow of company, the master of the wine shop was not visible. He was not missed, for nobody who crossed the threshold looked for him, nobody asked for him, and no one wondered to see only Madame Defarge in her seat, presiding over the distribution of wine, with a bowl of battered small coins before her, as much defeated and beaten out of their original impress as the small coinage of humanity from whose ragged pockets it had come. A suspended interest and a prevalent absence of mind were perhaps observed by the spies who looked in the wine shop, as they looked in at every place, high and low, from the king's palace to the criminal's jail. Games of cards languished, players at dominoes musingly built towers with them, drinkers drew figures on the tables with spilt drops of wine. Madame Defarge herself picked out the pattern on her sleeve with her toothpick, and saw and heard something inaudible and invisible a long way off. Thus, Saint Antoine, in this Venus feature of his, until midday. It was high noontide, when two dusty men passed through his streets and under his swinging lamps, of whom one was Monsieur Defarge, and the other a mender of roads in a blue cap. All adjust and athirst, the two entered the wine shop. Their arrival had lighted a kind of fire in the breast of Saint Antoine, fast spreading as they came along, which stirred and flickered in the flames of faces at most doors and windows. Yet no one had followed them, and no man spoke when they entered the wine shop, though the eyes of every man there turned upon them. "Good day, gentlemen," said Monsieur Defarge. It may have been a signal for loosening of the tongue. It elicited an answering chorus of "Good day." "It is bad weather, gentlemen," said Defarge, shaking his head. Upon which every man looked at his neighbor, and then all cast down their eyes and sat silent, except one man, who got up and went out. "My wife," said Defarge out loud, addressing Madame Defarge, "I have traveled certain leagues with this good mender of roads named Jacques. I met him by accident, a day and a half's journey out of Paris. He's a good child, this mender of roads. Give him a drink, my wife." Another man got up and went out. Madame Defarge set wine before the mender of roads named Jacques, who doffed his blue cap to the company and drank. In the breast of his shirt he carried some coarse dark bread. He ate of this between whiles, and sat munching and drinking near Madame Defarge's corner. A third man got up and went out. Defarge refreshed himself with a drink of wine, but he took less than was given the stranger, as being himself a man to whom it was no rarity, and he stood waiting until the countryman made his breakfast. He looked at no one present, and no one now looked at him, not even Madame Defarge, who had taken up her knitting and was at work. "Have you finished your meal, friend?" said Monsieur Defarge. "Yes, thank you." "Come, then. You shall see the apartment I told you that you could occupy. It will suit you to a marvel." Out of the wine shop into the street, out of the street and into a courtyard, out of the courtyard and up a steep staircase, out of the staircase and into a garret. formerly the garret where a white-haired man sat on a low bench, stooping forward, making shoes. No white-haired man was there now, but the three men were there who had gone out of the wine shop singly, and between them, with the white-haired man afar off, was the one small link that they had once looked in on him through chinks in the wall. Defarge closed the door carefully, and then spoke in a subdued voice. Jacques 1, Jacques 2, Jacques 3. This is the witness encountered by appointment by me, Jacques 4. He will tell you all. Speak up, Jacques 5. The mender of roads, blue cap in hand, wiped his swarthy forehead with it and said, Where shall I commence, monsieur? Commence, was Monsieur Defarge's not unreasonable reply. At the commencement. I saw him then, messieurs, said the mender of roads, a year ago this running summer, underneath the carriage of the Marquis, hanging by the chain. Behold the manner of it. I, leaving my work on the road, the sun going to bed, the carriage of the Marquis slowly ascending the chair, and him hanging by the chain like this. Again the mender of roads went through the old performance, in which he ought to have been perfect by then, seeing that it had been the infallible resource and indispensable entertainment of his village for the last year. Jacques 1 struck in and asked if he had ever seen the man before. Never, said the mender of roads, recovering his feet. Jacques 3 demanded how afterwards he had recognized him then. By his tall figure, said the mender of roads, softly and with his finger by his nose. When Monsieur the Marquis demands that evening, say, what is he like? I said, tall as a spectre. You should have said short as a dwarf, said Jacques 2. But what did I know? The deed was not then accomplished, neither did he confide in me. Observe, under these circumstances even, I do not offer my testimony. Monsieur the Marquis indicated me with his finger, standing a little near the fountain, and said, To me bring that rascal. Have faith, messieurs, I offered nothing. He's right there, Jacques, said Defarge, to him who had interrupted. Go on. Good, said the mender of roads with an air of mystery. The tall man is lost, and he is sought. How many months? 9, 10, 11? No matter the number, said Defarge. He is well hidden, but at last he is unluckily found. Go on. I am again at work, upon the side hill, and the sun is again about to go to bed. I am collecting my tools to descend to my cottage down in the village below, where it is already dark, when I raise my eyes and see coming over the hill 6 soldiers. In the midst of them is a tall man with his arms bound, tied to his sides like this. And with the aid of his indispensable cap, he represented a man with his elbows bound fast at his hips, with cords that were knotted behind him. I stood aside, messieurs, by my heap of stone, to see the soldiers and their prisoner pass, for it is a solitary road, that where any spectacle is worth seeing. And at first, as they approach, I see no more than they are 6 soldiers with a tall man bound, and that they are almost black to my sight, except on the side of the sun going to bed, where they have a red edge, messieurs. Also, I see that their long shadows are on the hollow ridge on the opposite side of the road, and are also on the hill above it, and are like the shadows of giants. Also, I saw that they are covered with dust, and that the dust moves with them as they come tramping along. But when they advance near to me, I recognize the tall man, and he recognizes me. Ah, but he would be well content to precipitate himself over the hillside once again, as on the evening when he and I first encountered each other, so close to the exact same spot. He described it as if he were there, and it was evident that he saw it vividly. Perhaps he had not seen much in his life. I do not show the soldiers that I recognize the tall man. He does not show the soldiers that he recognizes me. We do it, and we know it with our eyes. "Come on," says the chief of that company, pointing to the village. "Bring him fast to his tomb." And they moved him faster. I follow. His arms are swelled because of being bound so tight, his wooden shoes large and clumsy, and he is lame. Because he is lame and consequently slow, they drive him with their guns like this. He imitated the action of a man's being impelled forward by the butt ends of muskets. As they descend the hill like madmen running a race, he fell. They laugh and pick him up again. His face is bleeding and covered with dust, but he can't touch it, and therefore they laugh again. They bring him into the village, and all the village runs to look. They take him past the mill and up to the prison. All the village sees the prison gate open in the darkness of night and swallow him like this. He opened his mouth as wide as he could and shut it with a snap of his teeth. Observant of his unwillingness to mar the effect by opening it again, Defarge said, "Go on, Jacques." "All the village," said the mender of the roads, on tiptoe and in a low voice, "all the village withdraws, all the village whispers by the fountain, all the village sleeps, all the village dreams of that unhappy one within the locks and bars of the prison on the crag, never to come out of it except in death. In the morning, with my tools upon my shoulder, eating my morsel of black bread as I go, I make a circuit by the prison on my way to work. There I see him, high up behind the bars of a lofty iron cage, bloody and dusty as last night, looking out. He has no hand free to wave to me, and I dare not call to him. He regards me like a dead man." Defarge and the other three glanced darkly at each other. The looks of all of them were dark, repressed, and revengeful, as they listened to the countryman's story. The manner of all of them, well secret, was authoritative too. They had the air of a rough tribunal, Jacques 1 and 2 sitting on the old pallet bed, each with his chin resting on his hands and his eyes intent on the road mender. Jacques 3, equally intent, one knee behind him with his agitated hand always gliding over the network of fine nerves around his nose and mouth. Defarge between them and the narrator, who he had stationed in the light of the window, by turns looking from him to them and them to him. "Go on, Jacques," said Defarge. "He remains up there in his iron cage some days. The village looks at him by stealth, for it's afraid, but it always looks up from a distance at the prison on the crag, and in the evening, when the work of the day is done, and it assembles to gossip at the fountain, all village faces are turned towards the prison. Formerly, they were turned towards the posting house, now towards the prison. The villagers whisper at the fountain that although condemned to death, he will not be executed, They say that petitions have been presented in Paris, showing that he was enraged and made mad by the death of his child. They say a petition has been presented to the king himself. What do I know? It's possible. Perhaps yes, perhaps no. Listen then, Jacques, said number one of the name, sternly. Know that a petition was presented to the king and queen. All here, yourself excepted, saw the king take it in his carriage by the street, sitting beside his queen. It is Defarge, who you see here, who at hazard of his life darted out before the horses with the petition in hand. And once again listen, Jacques, said the kneeling Jacques III, his fingers ever wandering over those fine nerves with a strikingly greedy air, as though he hungered for something that was neither food or drink. The guard, horse and foot, surrounded the petitioner and struck him blows. Do you hear me? I hear, messieurs. Go on, then, said Defarge. Again, on the other hand, they whisper at the fountain, went Jacques, the mender of roads, that he is brought down into our country to be executed on the spot, and that he will very certainly be executed. They even whisper that because he has slain Monseigneur, and because Monseigneur was the father of his tenants, serfs, what you will, they say he will be executed as parricide. One old man says at the fountain that his right hand, armed with the knife, will be burned off in front of his face, and that into wounds that will be made on his arms, breast, and legs there will be poured boiling oil, melted lead, hot resin, wax, and sulphur, and that finally he will be torn limb from limb by strong horses. That old man says all this was actually done to a prisoner who made an attempt on the life of the last king, Louis XV, but how do I know if he lies? I'm not a scholar. Listen again, then, Jacques, said the man with the restless hand and the craving air. The name of that prisoner was Damien, and it was all done in open day, in open streets of this city of Paris, and nothing more was noticed than the last concourse that saw it done, nothing than the crowd of ladies of quality and fashion who were full of eager attention to the end of it. To the end of it, Jacques, prolonged until nightfall, when the man had lost 2 legs, an arm, and was still breathing. And it was all done. How old are you, Jacques? 35, said the mender of roads, who looked 60. It was done when you were no more than 10 years old. You might have seen it. Enough, said Defarge. Long live the devil. Go on. Well, said the mender of roads, some whisper this, some whisper that. They speak of nothing else. Even the fountain appears to fall to that tune. At length, on Sunday night, when all the village is asleep, come soldiers winding down from the prison, and their guns ring on the stones of the street. Workmen dig, workmen hammer, soldiers laugh and sing. In the morning, by the fountain, there is raised a gallows 40 feet high, poisoning the water. The mender of roads looked through rather than at the ceiling, and pointed as though he saw the gallows in the sky. All work is stopped. All assemble there. Nobody leads the cows on. The cows are there with the rest. At midday, the roll of drums. Soldiers have marched into the prison in the night, and he is in the midst of many soldiers, bound as before, and in his mouth there is a gag, tied with a tight string, making him look almost as though he were laughing. The mender suggested it by creasing his face with his thumbs from the corners of his mouth to his ears. On top of the gallows is fixed the knife, blade upwards, with its point in the air. He is hanged there 40 feet high, and is left hanging to poison our water. They looked at each other as he used his blue cap to wipe his face, on which the perspiration had started afresh while remembering the spectacle. It is frightful, messieurs. How can the women and children draw water? Who can gossip of an evening under that shadow? Under it, have I said. When I left the village Monday evening, as the sun was going to bed, and looked back from the hill, the shadow struck across the church, the mill, the prison. It seemed to strike across the earth, messieurs, to where the sky rests upon it. The hungry-looking Jacques gnawed one of his fingers as he looked at the other three, and his finger quivered with the craving on his face. That is all, messieurs. I left at sunset, as I had been warned to do, and I walked on that night and half-day next until I met this comrade here. With him, I came on, now riding, now walking, through the rest of yesterday and through last night, and now here you see me. After a gloomy silence, the first Jacques said, "Good. You have acted and recounted faithfully. Will you wait for us a little outside the door?" "Willingly," said the mender of roads. And Defarge escorted him to the top of the stairs, and leaving him sit there, he returned. The other three had risen, and their heads were together when he came back into the garret. "How say you, Jacques?" said number one. "To be registered?" "To be registered. As doomed to destruction." "Magnificent," croaked the man with the craving. "The chateau and all the race?" said the first Jacques. "The chateau and all the race," said Defarge. "Extermination." The hungry man said, with a rapturous croak, "Magnificent!" and gnawed on another finger. "Are you sure," said Jacques number two to Defarge, "that no embarrassment can arise from our matter of keeping the register? Without doubt it is safe, for no one beyond ourselves can decipher it, but shall we always be able to decipher it, or should I say, will she?" "Jacques," said Defarge, pulling himself upright, "if Madame, my wife, undertook to keep the register in her memory alone, she would not lose a word of it, not a syllable. Knitted in her own stitches and her own symbols, it will always be plain to her as the sun. Confide in Madame Defarge. It would be easier for the weakest poltron that lives to erase himself from existence than to erase one letter of his name or crimes from the knitted register of Madame Defarge." There was then a murmur of confidence and approval, and then the man who hungered said, "Is this rustic to be sent back soon? I hope so. He is very simple. Is he not dangerous?" "He knows nothing," said Defarge. "At least nothing more than would easily elevate himself to a gallows of the same height. I charge myself with him. Let him remain with me. I will take care of him and set him on his road. He wishes to see the fine world, the king, the queen, the court. Let him see them on Sunday." "What?" said the hungry man. "Is it a good sign that he wants to see royalty and nobility?" "Jacques," said Defarge, "judiciously show a cat milk if you want them to thirst for it. Judiciously show a dog his natural prey if you want him to bring it down one day." Nothing more was said. And the mender of roads, being found already dozing on the stair, was advised to lay himself down on the pallet bed and take some rest. He needed no persuasion, and soon was asleep. Worse quarters than Defarge's wine shop could easily have been found in Paris for a provincial slave of such a degree, saving for a mysterious dread of Madame, by which he was constantly haunted. The man's life was very new and agreeable. But Madame Defarge sat all day at her counter, so expressly unconscious of him, and so particularly determined not to perceive that his being there had any connection with anything below the surface, that he shook in his wooden shoes whenever he saw her. For he contended himself that it was impossible to foresee what that lady might pretend next. And he felt assured that if she should take it into her brightly ornamented head to pretend that she had seen him do murder and flay the victim, she would infallibly go through with it until the play was played out. Therefore, when Sunday came, the mender of roads was not enchanted, although he said he was, to find that Madame was to accompany Monsieur and himself to Versailles. It was additionally disconcerting to have Madame knitting all the way there. In a public conveyance, it was additionally disconcerting to have Madame in the crowd in the afternoon, still with her knitting in her hands as the crowd waited to see the carriage of the King and Queen. "You work hard, Madame," said a man that was near her. "Yes," said Madame Defarge. "I have a good deal to do." "What do you make, Madame?" "Many things." "For instance?" "For instance," said Madame Defarge, "shrouds." The man moved a little further away as soon as he could, and the mender of roads fanned himself with his blue cap, feeling it mightily close and oppressive. If he needed a king and queen to restore him, he was fortunate in having the remedy at hand, for soon the large-faced king and the fair-faced queen came in on their golden coach, attended by the shining bull's-eye of their court, a glittering multitude of laughing ladies and fine lords, in jewels and silks and powder and splendor, and elegantly spurning figures, handsomely disdainful faces on both sexes. The mender of roads bathed himself so much to his temporary intoxication that he cried, "Long live the king! Long live the queen! Long live everybody and everything!" as if he had never heard of the ubiquitous Jacques in his time. Then there were gardens, courtyards, terraces, fountains, green banks, more king and queen, more bull's-eye court, more lords and ladies, and more "long live they all," until he absolutely wept with sentiment. During the whole of the scene, which lasted some 3 hours, he had plenty of shouting and weeping and sentimental company, and throughout, Defarge held him by the collar, as if to restrain him from flying at the objects of his brief devotion and tearing them to pieces. "Bravo!" said Defarge, clapping him on the back when it was over. "You are a good boy." The mender of roads was now coming to himself, and was mistrustful of having made a mistake in his demonstrations, but no. "You are the fellow we want," said Defarge. "You make these fools believe that it will last forever. Then they are more insolent, and we are closer to the end." "Hey!" said the mender of roads. "That's true." "These fools know nothing. Well, they despise your breath, and would stop it forever, in you or 100 like you, rather than one of their own horses or dogs. They only know what your breath tells them." Let it deceive them a little longer. It cannot deceive them too much. Madame Defarge looked superciliously at the client and then nodded. As to you, she said, you would shout and shed tears for anything if it made show and noise, would you not? Truly, madame, I do think I would, at least for a moment. If you were shown a great heap of dolls, and were set upon them to pluck them to pieces and despoil them for your own advantage, you would pick out the richest and gayest of them, would you not? Truly, I would, madame. And if you were shown a flock of birds, unable to fly, and were set upon them to strip them of their feathers for your own advantage, you would set upon the birds with the finest of the feathers, would you not? It is true, madame. You have seen both dolls and birds today, said Madame Defarge, with a wave of her hand towards the place where they had last been. Now go home. And that is the end of the chapter. All right, well, back in France, and with what sounds like the beginning of the French Revolution about to start. And it sounds like, honestly, finally, we have a very, very strong and capable female character. It sounds like Madame Defarge might just be the shadow leader of the entire French Revolution, letting Jacques take the lead, or Monsieur Defarge. I wonder if his name is actually Jacques. I love how everybody just is getting the same name. That's annoying. But yeah, it sounds like there's so much more going on than I am getting. Because I'm kind of thinking that Monsieur Manette must be somehow connected to the whole French Revolution thing. But then again, why was he closed up in prison like 30 years ago or 20 years ago? I don't know. I hope that more of this comes out as we go through, because I think we're almost done with book 2 now. I don't feel like there's a lot more of book 2. Although I could be wrong. Because, yeah, we've got up to chapter 20. I could just look in the front and actually see how many books there are. I think there was like 4 books. We've got... You know, annotated books are kind of annoying. I don't know. We have several books more to go and lots of chapters more to go. So now that the story is starting to heat up, I am enjoying it a little bit more. I'm still, and I will always stand by it, too many words, but at least there's a story in there. So thank you as always. I hope that you enjoyed that chapter, and I will see you tomorrow. Oh, and hit the thumbs up on your way out. It does always make me smile. See you tomorrow.